Before 2020, when there was a restriction put on her, has she been your primary babysitter? She says no. Sadia was in daycare during that time. Jazzy was in school. So the only other time that Jasmine would have interaction with Sadia was if it was like non-school day and it had to do with the exchange. Like if you were dropping Sadia off or something like that, Jazzy would be there to retrieve her. But also my mom, she wasn't working. There was somebody there. Yeah, so mom was working in 2020. Could watch episode 25 to see mom's work schedule Monday through Friday. Okay, so she said, but also my mom, she wasn't working. There was somebody there. So I said, okay. And then she answered again. She said, and Jazzy would not be with her for long periods of time. I come home from work right after because back then I used to work from 7 a.m. to 3 p.m. So you agree that little time slot from 3 p.m. to 6 p.m. Jasmine, and she cut me off. She said I wasn't working 6 p.m. at that time. I was working from 7 a.m. to 3 p.m. All of those times when Jasmine was there for the exchange. I didn't start working at the whatchamacallit until around this year with that. And then she says, and then I say, at any point in time, has Jasmine, and the court cut me off. Wait, one moment. And so that at this time period, you guys are talking about, is Jasmine like 12 years old or something? The witness, Jazzy was in high school. Jazzy was not watching Sadia. Sadia was in daycare since I was going to nursing school. I had her in Little Big Think. She basically grew up in that daycare. And then I say, if Jazzy was 12, Dee Dee would not have been born yet. At any point in time in our co-parenting relationship, has Jasmine been your babysitter at any point in time, even if it was just for a couple hours? She says she would retrieve her. Yes. She would retrieve Sadia. Yes, that's it. She would retrieve Sadia from you and then somebody shortly would come home. Either my dad would come home or my mom was already there, or sometimes I'm there. So again, you see, I'm trying to get this answer out of her, and she's not giving me the answer that I'm looking for. So I say, so at some point in time, Jasmine would watch Sadia like until your mother or father would come home. She says, I just said no. And I said, no. And I said, Your Honor, I would like to admit this. This is Exhibit N. And once the restriction was put onto Jasmine, there was a petition from her attorney. And in line 25 of this petition, may I approach the bench and give you a copy? She said, yes. It's part of the court record. The court, I have it already, so I'll just look for it, Exhibit N. So on line 25, it says, it is averred that since the December 11, 2020 order, the petitioner has had to call off work many times due to the lack of being able to utilize a maternal aunt for a babysitter, as the maternal grandparents also work until 5 p.m. or 6 p.m. So had to call off work many times because you couldn't utilize Jasmine as the babysitter. When Jasmine and Christine testified, and I cross-examined them, they both also said no. So all three of them had the same story now, that Jasmine has never watched Sadia. And Jasmine is the person who sexually abused Sadia. Now that I asked her again, this is where her answer starts. You see where it says A. And it goes almost a whole page of her just saying a bunch of different things. And I hate to even read it because it's very confusing. But I'll go back to that and read that part. But let me just read the main parts first. So at any point in time, does Jasmine would watch Sadia like until your mother or father would come home? She said, I just said no. So now that I brought out the evidence and I asked her the same question. So you had to call off work many times because you couldn't utilize Jasmine as a babysitter. So I asked her the question again. So I said, so that goes back to my question. Has Jasmine ever babysat Sadia alone? She says, for a short period of time, when the whole 2020 COVID thing happened, she has. And when the whole 2020 COVID thing happened, and then I asked her again, I said, she has? And then the attorney says, Your Honor, asked and answered. And then I said, is that a yes or a no? And this is when she lashed out and started yelling. She said, I said yes the first, the second, the third, and the fifth time. I said, so you had to call off work many times because you couldn't utilize Jasmine as a babysitter. And this is one piece of evidence. I have numerous pieces of evidence showing that Sadia was spending the entire day with Jasmine by herself. So when I presented this one piece of evidence, I said to her, so you had to call off work many times because you couldn't utilize Jasmine as a babysitter. And this was her long answer to that. She says, after the whole thing with the whole 2020 thing and the whole COVID stuff, when daycares and things were closed, that's when I was trying to have Jazzy watch Sadia. Many times when my mom is not working or whatever, my mom's not working, but I had Jazzy there too, just in case. And then when everything had happened, she wasn't allowed to watch her anymore or be around her. And then with me, want and then with me wanting to watch Sadia, I couldn't work for 3 months because I couldn't, with the cases that I had, I wasn't able to, like, the parents need you to, like, they need somebody that is consistent. And I wasn't able to give them that consistent time because I had to be with Sadia. So I had to call off work. And I wasn't working for 3 months because of that. And then I wasn't able to pay my mortgage thing. So I started looking at a 24-hour daycare to pick up maybe a night shift because there was no more shift. I was working along the lines and daycare was closed. So I tried to get a night shift daycare for one day, that day that I have her, so it wouldn't interfere with you or anything. And then that was it. That was the whole what else he wrote. He was just trying to basically, he's not saying that. He was just trying to formulate that that I lost cases. I told him I've lost cases over this stuff. So he was just trying to inform that. And I said, that sounds good. But you see the confusion. I say, so the reason for you calling off work many times wasn't because you weren't able to utilize your babysitter as a babysitter. Is that it? And she says, I wasn't able to have Sadia over there anymore because of the investigation and everything that was going on. I said, well, she was allowed to be there. And she says, I wanted to keep her. There was no daycare or nothing open, so that there was nothing for me to do. And I said, well, the order didn't stop her from being there. It just stopped her from being there alone with Jasmine. Is that correct? She says she had to be supervised. And I said, so you had it pretty much. So she cut me off. She says, so sometimes if my mom is not there, I'm not going to thing for Jazzy to watch her if my mom's not going to be there. So I said, so that goes back to my question. Has Jasmine ever babysat Sadia alone? She says, for a short period of time, when the whole 2020 COVID thing happened, she has. And when the whole 2020 COVID thing happened, and then I asked her again, I said, she has? And then the attorney says, Your Honor, asked and answered. And then I said, is that a yes or a no? This is when she lashed out and started yelling. She said, I said yes the first, the second, the third, and the fifth time.